Podcast Network Asia.
This podcast is on a mission to end the orphan crisis. You're listening to Family is the Answer, powered by Podcast Network Asia. We share resources and stories to equip families who plan to adopt and foster, empower advocates who fight for vulnerable mothers and children, and invite communities to impact generations. I'm Karina Kuna-Henson, the Executive Director for Generations Home, a nonprofit organization and licensed child placement agency based in the Philippines. Learn more about our work through our website, generationshome.org. Now, let's jump in to this week's topic. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Family is the Answer podcast. My name is Karina, and I have the great joy of working with the team at Generations Home. Also, many of you know us as Rohe Foundation, and it's a really exciting time for us coming after our relaunch and just really looking forward to a lot of the things that are happening in the next few weeks for us. I hope you have been following us on social media and maybe our website as well. I hope you've checked out our new website. Our new website is looking really great. We're really excited about that, and I hope you've checked that out and have gotten familiar with the content that's up on the website, the fresh content that's up there. But back to today's episode, this podcast was really designed to do a couple of things. One, primarily equip families who are considering adoption, thinking about adoption, praying about adoption, and who are in that space of really trying to get equipped, trying to get their questions answered so that they would feel more ready and I guess more excited about taking on the whole adoption journey, especially here in the Philippines. And it's also for advocates. So if you're tuning in and you're here just because you want to understand the orphan crisis a bit better, you want to understand what the context in the Philippines is, what the process is like, and also what are some of the challenges that we see happening here in the Philippines around the adoption and foster care space when it comes to looking at long-term, permanent, family-based care for vulnerable children. Well, this is the right place for that. We at Generations Home believe that family is the answer. We believe that we can end the orphan crisis through families and that everybody has a part to play in that. And so today, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is we really wanted to acknowledge one of the concerns that many adoptive parents have, those who are currently in the process and those who are considering getting into adoption. And that would be the waiting time. One of the most frequently asked questions is, how long is it going to take? How long is the process of adoption? We get on the phone with different people and they ask, so how long is intercountry adoption and how long is domestic adoption? And we recognize that the waiting season for a family is very, very, very difficult. It can be frustrating. It can be sad and lonely. You're typically grieving, the loss of many things, the loss of the time that you could be with your child. And that waiting time is often really hard. It's just really, really hard. I know it. I've had to go through my own share of waiting on the finalization of my daughter's adoption. And I know firsthand just how difficult that is. The tears cried over just wondering when things are going to get moving. The reality is for us at Generations Home as well, we were so excited about getting our child placing agency license. So last year, more like towards the end of 2021, we were actually granted our license to operate as a child placing agency. We became the third. We became the third. Shortly after us, there was a fourth. We became the third licensed child placing agency in the Philippines. And we were extremely excited because we said, all right, here it is. We get to do our part. We get to help clear out the children that are waiting. And, the reality is we've realized that it's a lot more complicated than that. There are different challenges that we've encountered along the way, and we hope to share some of that with you today. And so a lot of times when we hear people say, hey, you said there's 1.8 million orphan children in the Philippines. There's even more vulnerable children. There's even more who have been abandoned or abused or neglected and are still in need of family. And then why is it taking so long? So this podcast, I hope, would address some of those questions that you've been asking. if there really are so many waiting children, where are they? Why is the adoption process for me taking so long? I hope that this podcast is able to address that. But before we dive in, I just really want to take a moment to celebrate with you guys the fact that we have 35 families who are officially processing their adoption journey with us through Generations Home. And this is just the regular adoption cases, which means they are putting their applications in, they are being assessed, they are doing whatever it takes to understand the adoption process in the Philippines, going through the forums, doing all the paperwork and all of that before getting matched with their child. And so we're so excited for them. I hope that many of you are listening as well, that to those 35 families, we just want to say we're so excited for you and we're cheering you on as you continue on in this journey. But this is also to acknowledge that, yes, the waiting is really, really, really hard. So we just wanted to share that with you. But let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about the common reasons that here in the Philippines, they call them PAPs, prospective adoptive parents. It's just the government acronym for it. That these prospective adoptive families have to wait so long. Well, let's go through some of the reasons. First, when they ask us, how long is it going to take? Or we typically have families asking us that question. Well, our answer is, how long can you get your documents ready? The first step in the adoption process is one, attending a forum. We have the adoption and foster care forums regularly. We have that once a month. They're typically done online, which is good news because that means no excuses. You don't need to drive anywhere. There's no traffic. Wherever you are, you can log on to our adoption and foster care forums. And the great thing about our adoption and foster care forums is if you're just curious and you just want to understand the process a bit more, there's actually no fee for listening in. The fee only kicks in if you need a certificate that needs to be presented to the NACC or as an official requirement. And so those forums happen regularly. After that, the ball is in your court. You then are required to gather the documents that you need to process the adoption or the foster care license. What does that look like? Those are simple things. Those are gathering your birth certificates, your marriage certificates, proof of income, NBI clearance. Then there are a couple of evaluations that are needed. You need a psych eval. You need a medical eval. You need, what else am I missing? Some of those other things. There's a couple others on that list. Maybe some recommendation letters from family or friends that have known you for a long time, that have the capacity to vouch for your character and tell us a little bit about you and why you might be hoping to become parents. And that simple list of documents, I'll tell you, we've met a range of families. One of our strongest foster care advocates, Isa Tika, always tells the story about how by some miracle, she got the list of requirements and in 2 weeks, she had completed everything. She had gathered everything she needed to process this foster care license. And in just 2 weeks, she was able to submit that and her license came out shortly after. But I would say that what we found is that she's typically the exception. It does take families some time to gather the requirements and the documentary requirements, that when you're actually in it, sometimes you need a bit of prompting. Sometimes you need to push yourself a little bit to get those documents together and ready to be submitted to us. One of our staff is also in the process of adopting, and she works for us full time. She's so immersed in in this world of knowing a lot about the orphan crisis, of knowing the needs and the process and, the list of documentary requirements. And in spite of all that, it's been a year and she only this week, if I'm not mistaken, is completing her last requirement, which is the psych evaluation. And she said she's been so humble about it. And she said it was okay to share it on the podcast because she said, I really wanted to make sure I was doing what I needed to do in terms of talking to my parents, to my siblings, to my family, because she's single, and wanting to make sure that all around her, there was agreement. Everybody was clear about what she was going to do moving forward. She had to wrestle with that and make sure that she was certain she wanted to push through with it. And the timing had to be really right for her. But she spent probably the last 6 months gathering documents and trying to get all of that together. And so this stage that she's been in for a year. So how long does it take? Well, I guess it really depends on how quickly you're able to gather your documents. And I guess our commitment to you as Generations Home is that when you process your adoption with us, when you process your foster license with us, we're committed to walking that out with you, to being there to support you, even in those steps of trying to gather your documents. Maybe you need some tips. Maybe you need some help. Maybe you need a referral to, what clinic could I get the medical assessment from? Or, do you have a psychologist or psychiatrist that could process my psych eval? And so 100% we're with you, and we're here to support you. But the timing of that and how quickly you're able to gather those documents really is on your side of things, and the ball's in your court for that. So that's the first one, right? It's really just taking a look at that and figuring out whether or not you've gotten all the requirements together. The second one would be that there's this concept of matching, which is part of the adoption process. A lot of our families, within the adoption process and the interviews that they have, they're asked a few questions. They're asked to give their preferences around the child that they'd be adopting. There are 3 things that you can identify when you list your preferences. One is gender. The second would be age. And the third would be which special needs you might be open to adopting or to having in your family. And so this obviously limits sometimes the options for children that are available for adoption. How do I explain this? So if you think about matching, right? We talk about this word a lot. And this is really, this happens after we at Generations Home submit your papers, submit your files to the NACC, which is the National Authority for Child Care. This is the government agency that has taken over adoptions and foster care from the DSWD. And this was established in RA 11642, the law which was signed in 2022. And so because of that, we submit our papers to the NACC, your papers to the NACC on your behalf, and then you get lined up for matching. And in these matching conferences, what they do is there is a list of families that are being presented. What they do is they take a look at the list of families that are being presented for adoption. They also take a look at the children who are available for adoption. And typically, the children that show up in these matching conferences are the children with what they call CD class, which I will talk about a little bit as well. But in matching, you take a chance because they look at your preferences. And for example, you say you're open to a child from the age of 0 to 2. If there are no children in the matching pool at that time from the age range of 0 to 2, then there's no match for you. So we share in just the hardship of knowing that many of our families have been in the matching pool for a couple of times, several times even, and have unfortunately not been matched because the preferences that they've specified with regards to gender, age, and special needs might not match the children that are available for adoption. And so one of the things that, we encourage families is to maybe see how flexible you might be in terms of widening the range of preference, either saying, maybe I'm not too particular about gender, or maybe saying, okay, I definitely want a boy, but I'd be open to a boy up to 4 years old, up to 5 years old. Typically, children who are adoptable and who are available for adoption are a little bit older. And so one of the families that we worked with, I think through the pandemic, and we were not yet a licensed child placement agency at this time, had shared with us that, they had, I think, been in 3 matching conferences and no match. And finally, their social worker, so thank God for the social worker, advised them to maybe consider raising their age of preference. So I think at that time they had, their range was a year to a year and a half, or newborn to a year and a half. And the social worker says, would you consider raising that to 2? So baby steps, right? Would you consider raising that to 2? And so they said, you know what? It's been 3 matchings and we still haven't been matched. So, okay, let's raise the age to 2. Raise the age to 2. And that very next matching were matched to a child who was a year and 11 months old. And, that little boy, it has just gotten so much love from this family. He's just so loved. This family has really no regrets in increasing the age preference. And, we share this story a lot because sometimes if we would just be willing to stretch out a little bit more, it provides for more options for the family when it comes to actual matching. Which leads me to explain another part of this. So yes, it depends on documentary requirements and how quickly you're able to comply. The matching conferences are key because the right match has to happen at the right time, given your preferences for gender, age, and special needs. And the last one would be to address the question that many families have come back to us with. A lot of families have come to us and said, hey, Generations Home, Rohe Foundation, you've advocated for the fact that there are so many waiting children and not enough families. Why is it that what we're hearing from other sources is that there aren't enough children and there are too many waiting families? Now, we're here to completely debunk that. That is not true. That is based on a technicality, and I want to explain that. So in the Philippines, we talk about the 1.8 million orphans and millions more who are considered vulnerable, neglected, abandoned, abused, and in need of permanent loving family. That is true. Now, are they waiting? Yes, many of them are waiting for somebody to come and rescue them out of the situations that they're in. But are they ready for adoption legally? Then the answer would be no. This means that child, in order for a child to be ready for adoption, that child needs to be issued what they call a CD-CLAA, which is a certificate declaring the child legally available for adoption. That's basically an adoption certificate that says that a social worker, child caring agency, or the local government unit's social worker has taken on the case of this child and has done whatever they could to make sure that this child truly has no other options. Because the last thing we want to be doing is placing children who actually have parents, who actually have loving parents or loving relatives in different families through adoption and foster care. We need to make sure that as child welfare specialists, that we first look into the possibility of having that child stay with biological family. And when that's not possible, that child needs what you call the CD-CLAA, or the certificate declaring a child legally available for adoption. Not many children have this certificate. In fact, when you go to children's homes, child caring agencies, you might see 30 children there. A good question to ask would be, how many of your children have certificates declaring them legally available for adoption? And we always say that, when you see a children's home, in order to know that it's healthy, that it's well run, that the funds are being stewarded well, you want to be asking those questions. Because if that children's home or that orphanage has no intention of looking at the long-term care of that child, there's no effort going into the processing of their CD-CLAA, then we have a problem. Because children are not meant to be in institutional care forever. Children are meant to be in family, and all of us are responsible for that. We're all responsible for advocating for that and working towards that, for children to be placed in family permanently. And so when you hear people say that there are more waiting families than there are waiting children, all that means is that, one, our advocacy is working. You're hearing our message, you're hearing our heart and the urgency behind the message that there are many children waiting, and you're acting first. And so you're at the forefront of that. You're taking things, you're taking control of things, and you're doing your part by saying, yes, okay, here I am. I'm ready to respond to the needs of the orphan crisis in the Philippines, which is why there are many waiting families, and there's a growing number of them. And, we celebrate the 35 families that are working alongside Generations Home currently to process their adoption. But what that also means is that there aren't enough waiting children. And one of our hopes as Generations Home is we really want to look at how we can scale our work, grow our work, increase our funding, so that we would be able to not just take a look at this side of the child placing agency side, but how we might be able to go back and circle back to the children's homes, to the orphanages, to the local government units that are processing the CD-CLAAs, and see how we might be able to offer technical support and how we might be able to advocate for the need to actually process CD-CLAAs quicker, so that the children that are waiting can get adopted. because we know we do have a growing number of waiting families, of potential adoptive families, but unfortunately, they're not being matched. And the matching time is taking so long. And so, we're grateful for the new law. This new law, which I mentioned earlier, RA 11642, is really designed to help streamline the adoption process. And so our hope is that even while you're waiting, you would be assured of the fact that this new law, which is now already being implemented at a government level, and we're starting to see the fruit of that, that you're benefiting from that. And that there is a move towards a more streamlined, more efficient adoption process. But there's so much that you could do while waiting. And I hope you hear our hearts when we say we know and we hear your frustrations. We know how difficult it can be to wait. I sympathize so much with many of our families that have been waiting for several months now for the matching. First, we were waiting for the matching conferences to resume. And now that the matching conferences are back, waiting for there to be enough children who are being presented during the matching conferences. And so, we just want to say that we see you and we know it's difficult. Our hope is that while you wait, you would take the time to partner with us in advocating for adoption, advocating for foster care, advocating for better systems around adoption. We have a long way to go. We've made great strides in the last year, but there's a long way to go. We can continue to help families understand that adoption doesn't need to be plan B, that adoption can be plan A in building their family. They don't need to wait for infertility issues or for resorted to IVF and various treatments. But we can see adoption as a plan A. It can be part of our plan. It can be part of the way we design our lives and the way we choose to build our families. And you can help us by sharing stories. Social media is an incredible platform. It's an incredible tool. We're so grateful. Just recently, there was like a Filipino influencer based out of Canada who posted about us during our relaunch and got, a ton of views, and we were able to reach a whole new audience because this young man felt the burden to advocate for orphans in the Philippines. And our hope is that you would come alongside us and partner with us, that in this time of waiting, it would not just be waiting, but you would take it upon yourself to advocate so that the system at large would get better. As a nation, we would get better. The adoption system would get better. And we at Generations Home would also be able to get better and get sharper at what we do. And lastly, what can you do while waiting? Visit some children's homes. We have started to encourage many of our prospective adoptive parents, those who are processing their adoptions with us, to go and visit children's homes. This is something I did a lot of in the early days of starting the work of Rohi Foundation. I was visiting a lot of children's homes. I was understanding their work. I was trying to see and ask. I would ask, how many of these kids have CD class? So, when did this come in? And typically, how long does it take? And I was becoming more aware, and I was understanding the system better. And it was expanding my view of reality so that I would have a whole picture of what the challenges were. And so we encourage you to do that. Talk to the house parents, talk to the social workers, hear their heart, and let them hear yours. Hopefully in meeting you, it would encourage everybody, inspire everybody to advocate a little bit more, to speed things up in the processing of a child's papers. And hopefully it would make the whole system better. And so I think there's a lot that we could do. I know that's easier said than done, but we want to recognize that we know this season of waiting is a hard one. Also, for me, my advice would be to pray for your child. I think one of the hardest things about waiting for an adoption process to be complete is knowing that your child is out there. I was just talking to somebody recently and telling them, the difference between adopting and having a child biologically is that when you biologically are pregnant with a child, that child is still under your care. I get to feed that child, I get to care for that child. I make sure that child is well. I get to manage their checkups, and I'm caring for that child while I'm pregnant. And I'm in control of how that child is doing inside my womb. When you are processing a child through adoption and you're waiting, even though you mimic the 9 months, which you might have heard that DSWD used to try to do is mimic the 9 months. Even if you were to do that, that child is not in your sight, not in sight. You don't know where they are. You don't know how they're doing. You don't know if they're well fed. You don't know if they're well clothed. You don't know if they're sick. You don't know if they're in pain. And that is incredibly difficult for a parent. And so my encouragement would be really for you to just do what you can and to remember that prayer is an incredibly powerful thing, that you can pray for your children and know that they're out there and bless them, and know that even though you might feel like there's not much you can do in this season of waiting, is to know and to trust that God is moving on behalf of your family as you pursue adoption. And so that's, I suppose, my, closing encouragement for you, to just remind you also that we're holding the ropes with you, to reach out to us, to all of our prospective adoptive parents that are journeying with us. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for the trust. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to just being able to connect with you and hear your stories and what the journey has been like for you. And thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope it helps everybody get a better understanding of what's happening and why the wait is so long. It is agonizing, I know. And so we're here with you. We're cheering you on. And if you need more support from us, please do reach out to us. Again, you can find us on our website, generationshome.org, generations with an S at the end, .org. And you can still find us on Facebook and on Instagram and on the various social media platforms. You can connect with us via email or on those social media channels. And we would love, love, love to stay in touch with you. So thanks again. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Family is the Answer podcast. We look forward to bringing you more content and hope to hear from you again soon. Bye. That was the Family is the Answer podcast by Generations Home, powered by Podcast Network Asia. Learn more about ending the orphan crisis and fueling our work through our website, generationshome.org. You can also find us on social media. We're generations.home.connect on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you found this podcast helpful, please leave us a rating so more people can find it too. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you at our next episode.
The views and opinions expressed by the podcast creators, hosts, and guests do not necessarily reflect the official policy and position of Podcast Network Asia, the hosts of the program, or other programs of the network. Any content provided by the people on the podcast are of their own opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything.